Hello. This video is going to continue our discussion of Chapter 1, Section 2. We ended our last video by talking about the Paleolithic era. And to summarize what we learned, we remember that the life for human beings in that era was not particularly exciting or great. It was primarily, mainly concerned with pure survival, just the ability to create enough food resources to allow the human species to reproduce, to survive. Okay, these kinds of harsh hand-to-mouth living conditions really did not allow for humanity to grow beyond this quest for simple survival. Our main goal, as it were, was just to get by. And that does not leave us with a lot of extra opportunity to advance as a species. Okay. So our culture does not grow because our demands for just simply surviving are too difficult. It's important to remember, though, from what we discussed, we still do see some really amazing things happening with Paleolithic humans. Their rituals, their intellectual curiosity, and just the sheer fact that being able to survive in this difficult time requires a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of ingenuity, all points to the humans of the Paleolithic era being regarded not just as sort of like brutes or cavemen, ignorant. They are us. They have the same capability for intellect that we modern day humans do. Um, so it's important to keep that in mind even as we leave the Paleolithic era and start talking about the next step in human prehistory, which is the Neolithic Revolution, also known as the Agricultural Revolution. And as you might be able to guess, the big turning point for humans, the thing that makes our lives change completely, is the concept of agriculture. Human beings learn not just how to hunt and gather, but how to systematically raise plants and animals for our own use. It might seem like a small distinction, the idea of hunting and gathering versus raising the plants yourselves, but it is a big deal. Humans learn how to domesticate plants and animals, and in so doing, they change the course of human history and human society forever. Okay, so this is what causes the big change, somewhere around 10,000 BC or so. Some people call this new way of life where humans are purposefully raising plants and animals for their own use. There's sometimes people call it pastoralism, from the Latin word pastor, which means a shepherd or a herdsman, because now you're raising animals as opposed to hurting them, or sorry, as opposed to hunting them. And again, the two types of living might seem similar, but there are many benefits to abandoning a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Okay, the first is that switching to a domestication lifestyle, an agricultural lifestyle, farming lifestyle, essentially, allows you to get more of the resources from the animals that you're interacting with. Right, so if you hunt an animal and kill it, now you've got their meat and you might be able to get their skin and all those things, right? But think about the fact that you could have all of those same things, right, from the animal, but if you keep it alive, you raise it, right, as a domesticated animal. Now you can take advantage of other things that it can provide for you, right? So killing a cow doesn't get you the milk, but raising that cow does, right? Or take chickens, for instance, right? Yes, killing that chicken can provide you with food and some resources like feathers and things like that. But if you raise that chicken and then eventually kill it, in the meantime, while you're raising that chicken as a domesticated, not pet, but domesticated working animal, as it were, now you get the access to those eggs. Okay, so raising animals in a domesticated way gives you extra animal byproducts that you wouldn't necessarily have had access to if you were purely hunting them. This, of course, gives you a more consistent supply of food, right? Because you get more food from the animals that you are going to be hunting anyway, right? It's also a lot more reliable, right? You don't have to track down the cow that you're looking to kill if it just happens to be in the field next to your house, right? Hunting requires a certain bit of luck, whereas domestication really just takes time and effort. All right, so you can get more food, more animal byproducts, and you can get them more consistently. Um, of course, this isn't perfected, right, immediately, right? They don't magically just one day decide, oh, I think I'll start farming, and they magically switch over to doing that. It takes a certain amount of time. So, maybe they were hunting some animals and killed many of them, but kept one of them alive, right, and tried to raise it, right, as their own. And maybe they failed at it the first time. It ran away or whatever, right? Slowly but surely, through a trial and error process, humans figure out eventually how to raise these animals in a way that is going to make them useful, more useful than they would have been in a hunter gatherer style scenario. The same goes for plants, right? It's not just finding whatever berry bushes or plants happen to be around and then moving on to the next ones when those run out of stuff that we can eat. Now it's I have these bushes that I've planted myself, or these plants that I've planted myself in a field near my home. And I know that in a couple of weeks, months, whatever, these things are going to provide food for me. And then I'm going to repeat the cycle again. Again, it doesn't start completely, perfected. They probably accidentally realized, for instance, that oh, look, these seed things inside of these berries, if you put them in the ground, they grow. But before that, they probably just happened to realize that the places where they were throwing away seeds happened to grow berry bushes. And then they said, oh, well, maybe we should try to do that on purpose instead of on accident. So they figure these things out haphazardly, sort of randomly, accidentally. And then as time goes on, they slowly, through trial and error, figure out how to do it officially. One of the things that helped in this transition to agriculture as a way of life for humans was that temperatures across the globe were rising. And this makes sense. It's more difficult to grow plants and to raise animals in colder weather. The chances of them surviving are not as good. So humans partially figure this out through trial and error, but they also get a little bit of help from the world itself because the planet starts warming up, which makes doing this kind of domestication of plants and animals a little bit easier. It's important to note, though, that this agricultural revolution, this Neolithic revolution, is neither universal nor immediate. I've already talked about the immediate element here, that they don't magically, automatically just start perfectly farming. They haven't perfected the technique instantly. But the universal thing has two key elements. The first is that not every human society completely adapted to agriculture. Most of them did, but there are some human societies that stayed nomadic, that just continued to lead the same nomadic lives that they led back when they were in the hunter-gatherer stage of human society. Okay, so it's not universal in the sense that not everybody became farmers or adapted to farming. The other way that it's universal is that it's not completely universal, is that different human groups figured out agriculture independently of each other. So a group in Africa might figure it out independently of a group in the Americas. It's not that one society figured it out and then that knowledge spread from group to group. Okay, so it's not universal in the sense of it doesn't have all one origin. There were multiple places that all developed agriculture at different times. And not all human societies switched over to agriculture. Some of them stayed nomadic. So the question is, what are the changes that came about as a result of the agricultural revolution? Okay. Well, the first thing is if you make your own food, right, in a systematic way through farming, through agriculture, whether that's plants or animals, okay, now you no longer have to move from place to place to find new food. Okay. In the hunter-gatherer society, you're moving with your food sources. And when your food runs out in one place, you move on to the next place. And you don't have to do that anymore now, because now those berries that you're looking for are just growing next door to you. So you stop acting like nomads, you stop traveling all the time as humans, and instead you just put all of your eggs into the basket of planting and growing and raising animals in a single location. And by doing that, you've now given yourself the chance to set up more permanent housing for yourself, right? We know that humans in the hunter-gatherer society did build shelters for themselves, but they were sort of temporary or easily, destroyable, because you have to just break it down and move to the next place. Now, humans are incentivized to set up in a single location and keep building there. And so we start to get the development of villages, these permanent residences in human life that we didn't have previously. Okay. That's one big change. The other big change is now we start to see not just people getting enough food, but now there's extra food. Because while a hunter gatherer system is not going to provide a lot of excess food or any excess food, agriculture produces not just a reliable amount of food, right, that comes in consistently, but it also produces extra food. You can get more food. So now, instead of all of the humans in a single group all having to spend 100% of their time finding food to survive, right? Now, a smaller group of humans can focus on food, and that will have still enough food for everybody to be able to eat. And then they'll have extra food, which then allows them to grow their population a little bit bigger. So we end up with more food leading to more people. Because if you've got room to grow in terms of your food supplies, your population is going to grow. This concept, by the way, of more food, more people is one of the most common refrains that you're going to hear in our class, especially early on. So get used to that phrase: more food, more people. Now, if you combine these two things, the stability of not having a nomadic lifestyle anymore, of being in the same place for an extended period of time, and an increasing population, those two things combine together to lead to cultural advancement, cultural change. Now, human society can start getting better. It can start improving itself in a way that its previous lifestyle of nomadic hunter gatherers were not able to achieve. How does this work? Well, if you want to do farming, you need all the stuff that's going to help you farm effectively. You're going to need tools. You're going to need strategies for how to farm and when, right? Well, now that you have some people that can sit around thinking about ways to solve those problems and don't have to spend their time coming up with, where am I going to get food? Now people can start to develop new technologies, right? Because you've got spare people who can sit around developing those things. So somebody can sit around and figure out a calendar, right? Because now they don't have to spend that time worrying about where they're going to get their food. They can start thinking about where the next plantings are going to happen and when. Because you're not nomadic anymore, you also start to get increased numbers of possessions. People have more stuff. They had less stuff because when they were moving from place to place constantly, having stuff is a liability. Now, if you're setting up shop in a house or something that you build for yourself and you're going to stay there for a while, you can accumulate all sorts of objects. And of course, more stuff leads to people wanting to trade stuff, buy stuff, get the stuff that somebody else has, right? So now you're going to start to develop an economy, right? People are going to start buying and selling the things that they have from one another. And of course, the people with the most stuff now become more valuable or more important. And the people who have less stuff are less advantaged. So we get to see not only economies developing, but we also start to see social classes, social stratification, the wealthy, the elite versus the poor and the less powerful. Okay? We also start to see new jobs and people kind of finding new jobs and focusing on a single thing, right? Before, in the hunter-gatherer system, everybody does everything. Everything primarily is searching for food, but everybody does everything. Now, if only a few people need to farm to keep the rest of the society alive, what do those other people do all day? Well, they start specializing in other jobs. They stop doing food production and start working on other things. Maybe they start becoming merchants. Maybe they start to become artisans, start crafting things. Warriors to protect the village and protect all the resources. Maybe they become scientists to work on the technology stuff. All of these different things are only possible because now you have extra people who have nothing to do because their other friends are doing all the farming and the food creation. So they can use their spare time to work on other things. We already talked about trade increasing because now we have economies. Some of the items that early Neolithic humans would be interested in are listed there, although you don't have to actually memorize any of them. This is also the era where we see stone kind of reaches its peak of being a useful material for tools. At a certain point, however, there's going to be a need to advance beyond tools. The tools that are made out of stone are not going to be able to do anything enough or good enough for the people, the humans that are trying to live in these eras. So again, technology starts to develop and they start to figure out ways to do things without stone and move on to better materials. So those were some positive changes, but it's not all positive. There are some downsides to a Neolithic system, the agricultural system. And the first one, and kind of the most critical one, is that once you swap over to using agriculture, you cannot swap back. You cannot go back to a hunter-gatherer style of keeping things together. So imagine in a hunter-gatherer society, the maximum amount of food that you can create can only support 30 people. Okay. All of a sudden, you figure out farming. Farming allows for you to create one person to create, let's say 40 things worth of food, right? And now all of a sudden you can get more people into your society. So let's say you've got 40 people in your society. If you try to swap back to hunter-gatherers, now you're back down to 30, right? 30 units of food. What happens to those 10 people that you can't support anymore? Nothing. They die or they have to go somewhere else, right? So you can no longer ever swap back to hunting and gathering once you switch to agriculture. And we swapped. We swapped in 10,000 BC as a world, as a planet, as a human society, and we have never switched back. We've been using an agricultural model ever since. So you can't ever go back to hunting and gathering after you switch. The other big problem that comes up in the Neolithic period due to reliance on agriculture is you're not as flexible in the face of climate disasters or other big problems that might occur in your geographic world. So when you're a hunter-gatherer society, and it just so happens that the area that you were living in for the moment gets flooded, or there's a fire, or something like that, all you have to do is pack up and move, and then you're in the next area, right? But if you are in the Neolithic period and you've set up a village with farmlands and animals and pens and all that sorts of stuff, and then there's a flood and all of that is destroyed, you can't get back to the same level that you were at right away. It takes time to build up all of that infrastructure again. And as I just said, you can't switch back to hunting and gathering because you're not going to have enough food to keep everybody alive. So what that means is a natural disaster hits your Neolithic, village, and now you're kind of guaranteed to lose some people just because it's going to require you to bounce back, and it's going to be very difficult. So Neolithic humans struggled in the face of climate variations or climate disasters, natural disasters. They were not able to bounce back as effectively as their hunter-gatherer predecessors. We also see increased levels of military activity in the Neolithic period and the first uses of weapons against other humans, humans fighting against other humans, presumably because they want to take their stuff that they can have now, or they have spare people that are willing to become warriors and go fight with other humans. So this is kind of a negative change if you're against warfare. When you have more people all in one spot, right? More food leads to more people. So when you have more people in one spot, that can cause sanitation issues and disease issues. The more people you pack into a close area, the harder it becomes to prevent disease from spreading in that area. So as populations grow in the Neolithic period, we start to see more evidence of disease and sickness in the human population. We also know that their teeth started to get worse. They started to have a lot more teeth issues because they're primarily growing a lot of carbs, a lot of like wheat and other carbohydrate rich foods, thanks to farming. And of course, that diet is very sugary, and they don't have good teeth sanitation or teeth cleaning. So we see a lot of evidence for like tooth decay on the teeth of the humans living in the Neolithic period. And it's all because of farming. Really, most interesting in my mind, though, is the swap in the gender roles and the gender statuses that we see once the agricultural revolution happens. Women previously in the Paleolithic era were the top dogs because they brought in the most food in the gathering aspect of hunter gatherers. And females were very revered for their fertility power and their connection to one of the most important forces in the world, right? Fertility. Well, in the Neolithic Revolution, farming is this very difficult, labor-intensive of activity, meaning that males start being the ones who are doing primarily all the farming. And then, of course, if they're bringing in more food, they take on the higher status, just as women did in the Paleolithic period. So now men are on top. And of course, if men are on top as human civilization is developing and growing, right? Now men are going to start taking up those important roles that are becoming new or newly developing as well. We do see some evidence that there may have been sort of matriarchal human civilizations in the Neolithic period, but really, and females still typically tended to be very connected to the important religious elements of fertility magic. But overall, human society swaps to a patriarchal system, which still exists today. So if you're wondering why we live in a patriarchal system today, it can trace all the way back to the Neolithic Revolution, all the way back in 10,000 BC. So these are the negative Neolithic changes. But overall, this switch to a agriculture-based system is on net a very positive change because it allows for humans to actually set in motion the ability to develop and grow as a society, to actually develop civilization, right? Technology and the arts and all of those things. Because now, more food, more people, we have spare people who can spend time working on these extra things and start to grow human society in a way that we couldn't do back when we were hunter gatherers and all we could focus on was our own survival. So we start to see the development of cities in the Neolithic period, cities that look like what we expect from ancient cities. And you can look through these various cities on your own and see some of the stats involved with what they looked like. But these kinds of developments, like building cities and building walls and developing irrigation systems, it's all caused thanks to the Neolithic Revolution, right? The idea of having more food leading to more people, and then those more people leading to the ability to then specialize and work on things that are beyond just simple survival. Thanks for listening.